My name is Janice Whitaker. I'm 58 years old, and at my husband's 63rd birthday party, he looked right at me, wrapped his arm around his ex-wife, and said loud enough for the whole room to hear, "Can you step out? This is a family photo." For a second, I honestly thought I'd misheard him. We were standing in the back room of the Texas Roadhouse off Polaris Parkway in Columbus, Ohio. Saturday night. The place smelled like steak butter and that cinnamon bread they bring out in baskets. Country music humming through the speakers. Balloons tied to the chairs. One of those big sheet cakes from Kroger sitting on a folding table with plastic forks stuck into the frosting. About 20 people were there. Ron's side of the family mostly. His sister Linda and her husband Gary. A couple cousins I still mixed up after 5 years. His daughter Kelsey, who'd driven down from Cleveland, and Denise. Denise is Ron's ex-wife. She'd shown up for Kelsey, which had become the standard explanation over the years. Everybody said it like that made it simple. At first, the night had gone the usual way. People laughing too loud. Ron holding court with a bourbon in his hand. Gary telling the same story about the fishing trip on Lake Erie that somehow got longer every time. Somebody's kid running around with a bread roll. I was the one keeping things moving like always. Making sure the waitress knew we still needed iced tea refills. Cutting the cake before the frosting melted under the lights. Passing out plates. Normal stuff. The photographer, really just Linda's neighbor with a decent iPhone, stood up and clapped her hands. "All right, everybody, let's get a picture before folks start leaving." Chairs scraped across the floor. People shuffled toward the wall with the balloons. "Family first," she said. And that's when Ron turned to me. He had one arm around Denise already, like it had landed there naturally. Then he looked straight at me and said it. "Can you step out? This is a family photo." Not quietly. Not like he was joking. Just matter of fact. The room got that strange, half-quiet you only hear in restaurants when something awkward happens. Silverware clinking somewhere across the room. A chair creaking. Somebody coughing. Linda laughed. Not a big laugh. More like a quick little puff. "Oh, Ron," she said, shaking her head. "You're terrible." But she didn't tell him to knock it off. Nobody did. Denise didn't move. Kelsey glanced at me, then back at the camera, like maybe if she didn't react, it would pass faster. I stood there holding a stack of paper plates. For a moment, my brain tried to file what I'd heard under joke. Like maybe the punchline would show up any second. It didn't. Ron just gave a small, impatient wave toward the edge of the group. "You know what I mean?" The plates in my hands suddenly felt heavier than they should have. I set them down on the cake table. No speech, no scene. I stepped sideways. Out of the frame. The neighbor lifted her phone. "Everybody squeeze in." Flash. And that was it. I remembered Denise smiling like she'd practiced it. One of those wide, bright smiles people use for holiday cards. After the picture, the noise in the room picked back up. Conversations restarted. Someone asked where the candles were. Life moving on. Except I wasn't in it anymore. I grabbed my purse from the chair near the wall. My keys were buried under receipts and lip balm and the little notebook I use for grocery lists. Ron didn't notice me leave. He was pouring another drink. Outside, the air had cooled down the way it does in late September in Ohio. Not cold yet, but that hint of fall creeping in. The parking lot lights buzzed overhead. I got into my Honda CR-V and sat there a minute. My hands were shaking. Not dramatically. Just enough that the key rattled in the ignition. I started the car and pulled out onto Polaris Parkway heading south toward home. Traffic wasn't bad. Mostly families heading back from dinner, or teenagers cruising around the mall. About 10 minutes later, I had to pull into the Kroger parking lot. My chest felt tight. I parked under one of those tall lights near the cart return and just sat there staring at the dashboard clock. 9:07 p.m. People pushed grocery carts past my car. A couple arguing quietly about what kind of ice cream to buy. Someone loading cases of soda into a trunk. Normal life. Inside the car, it felt like the air had changed. I replayed the moment over and over. The arm around Denise, the casual tone in Ron's voice, that little laugh from Linda. I kept waiting for the part where I'd misunderstood something. It never arrived. After about 15 minutes, I drove the rest of the way home to our place in Worthington. Small ranch house on a quiet street with maple trees lining the sidewalks. I went inside. The house was dark, except for the kitchen light I'd left on earlier. His jacket was still hanging on the back of the chair. The dishwasher hummed quietly under the counter. I poured myself a glass of water and leaned against the sink. For the first time all evening, I felt the embarrassment catch up with me. Not loud. Just a slow heat creeping up my neck. The clock over the stove ticked past 10. Then 11. Ron didn't come home. Around midnight, my phone buzzed on the counter. A text from Linda. He's been drinking nonstop since you left. I stared at the message. There was a second one right after. Think he feels bad? I let out a small laugh. It surprised me. Not bitter exactly. More like tired. I set the phone face down on the counter. Good, I thought. Let him sit with it for once. Because the truth was, as I stood there in that quiet kitchen, I realized something that hadn't fully landed in the restaurant. That moment hadn't come out of nowhere. It was just the first time the whole room had seen it. The truth is, that moment in the restaurant didn't begin that night. It had been building quietly for years. When I met Ron Whitaker, I was 53 years old and recently divorced. My first husband and I had ended things the slow, polite way people sometimes do after 30 years. No big scandal, just the kind of silence that grows between two people until it fills the whole house. I met Ron at a VFW fundraiser in Westerville. My friend Marlene had dragged me along because she said I needed to get back out into the world. The hall smelled like coffee, cheap beer, and those paper-wrapped hot dogs they sell at church carnivals. A local band was playing old Eagles songs. Ron asked me to dance during Take It Easy. He had a nice smile, warm eyes, the kind of man who seemed comfortable in his own skin. We talked for 2 hours that night. About our kids, about how strange it felt dating again in our 50s, about how both of us thought the hard parts of life were supposed to be behind us by now. I remember thinking this might actually be easier the second time around. And in some ways it was. Ron was easygoing, friendly, the kind of guy who could chat with the mechanic, the neighbor, and the cashier at Kroger, all in the same 5-minute trip. He liked routine. Sunday morning coffee, watching the Browns lose every fall, backyard grilling when the weather cooperated. For the first year or so, everything felt pretty smooth. Denise came around occasionally for things involving Kelsey. Birthdays, graduations, the occasional holiday. Ron always explained it the same way. She'll always be Kelsey's mom. We keep things friendly. I told myself that was mature. Healthy even. But little things started piling up. Nothing dramatic, just small moments that left a quiet scratch somewhere under my ribs. The first Thanksgiving after Ron and I married, I cooked the entire meal. Turkey stuffing, sweet potatoes, green beans, pumpkin pie. The whole spread. Linda walked into the kitchen while I was carving the turkey. She smiled and said Denise always made the best Thanksgiving dinners. She really was the heart of the family. I remember standing there holding a carving knife, wondering if she realized what she'd just said. Ron squeezed my shoulder and laughed. She didn't mean anything by it, he told me later. That became his favorite sentence. She didn't mean anything by it. Over time, I became the person who kept things running. Not because anyone asked me to exactly, but because if I didn't do it, it didn't get done. I scheduled Ron's cardiology checkups, refilled his prescriptions at the CVS on High Street, handled the car insurance renewals, kept track of which cousin couldn't eat onions and which one needed decaf coffee after dinner. Every year, I organized the family Christmas exchange, drew names, sent reminders, bought wrapping paper. I even set up automatic liquor delivery through Total Wine before holidays because Ron liked to host. Smart thinking, he'd say, pouring a glass of bourbon. You're the organized one, which sounded like a compliment at the time. I handled birthdays too. Kelsey's birthday, Linda's birthday, Ron's mother's birthday, even Gary's, though he once forgot my name at a cookout. Cards, gifts, phone calls. If you looked at the calendar on our refrigerator, you'd see my handwriting on almost every square. And I didn't resent it. Not exactly. I thought that was what building a family meant. Showing up, keeping things together. The strange thing is, nobody ever said I wasn't part of things. They just behaved like I wasn't. It was subtle. When people told old stories, Denise's name floated through them like she'd never left. Remember when Denise planned that beach trip? Denise always made the best deviled eggs. Denise used to... I'd sit there smiling, politely topping off people's iced tea glasses. Ron never corrected it. He'd just nod along. One evening, about 2 years ago, we were driving home from dinner with Linda and Gary. I finally said something. Do you ever notice how often your family talks about Denise? Ron shrugged. That's just history, Janice. Nothing personal. Sometimes it feels a little personal. He sighed like I was asking him to move mountains. You're reading too much into things. So I stopped bringing it up. Life went on. Trips to Costco on Saturdays, watching reruns of Blue Bloods on Friday nights. Summer evenings sitting on the back patio while Ron grilled burgers. Ordinary married life, except for one small truth I didn't fully admit to myself until much later. I was included for the work, but not always for the belonging. That night after the birthday dinner, I sat at the kitchen table scrolling through the family group chat. Photos were already being posted. Linda had uploaded the big group shot. Ron stood in the middle holding a drink. Denise on one side, Kelsey on the other. Everyone smiling. I studied the picture longer than I should have. Near the far edge of the frame, you could see something small. The sleeve of my gray cardigan. Just the cuff. A little piece of fabric caught before I stepped away. I stared at it, and suddenly that tiny detail hurt more than Ron's words. Because it showed exactly what had happened. I hadn't imagined it. I hadn't exaggerated it. I had simply been edged out. I closed the group chat and set the phone down. The house was quiet except for the refrigerator humming. For a long time, I just sat there. Then a strange calm started settling in. Not relief. Something colder than that. Clarity. For years I had told myself I was being patient, understanding, the bigger person. But sitting there at that table, I began mentally listing everything I handled in that house. Every bill, every reminder, every quiet fix. And a question slipped into my mind that wouldn't leave. If I stopped doing all of that, what exactly would happen? The next morning, Ron came home around 8:30. I was already awake. One thing about getting older is your sleep gets lighter. Once I wake up, that's usually it. So by the time I heard his truck pull into the driveway, I'd already had coffee fed the neighbor's cat she was out of town and read half the dispatch at the kitchen table. The front door opened slowly. Ron stepped in like a teenager trying not to wake his parents. He smelled like bourbon and that smoky bar smell that clings to clothes. He saw me sitting there and froze a little. Well, he said. His voice was rough. Morning. Morning, I said. He walked to the sink and poured himself a glass of water. Drank half of it in one gulp. Neither of us spoke for a moment. Finally, he sighed. You embarrassed me last night. I blinked at him. Excuse me. Storming out like that? He said, rubbing the back of his neck. People kept asking where my wife went. I looked at him across the table. Apparently not in the family photo. I didn't say it the way I'd practiced in my head on the drive home. It came out quieter than that. Ron, you asked me to step aside. He shifted his weight. You know what I meant. No, I said. Actually, I don't. His jaw tightened. You're making a big deal out of nothing. That was the moment something inside me settled. Not anger exactly. More like a door closing. Okay, I said. He frowned. Okay. Yeah, I said, standing up. Okay. And I walked down the hallway to the guest room. I didn't slam the door. Didn't cry. I just closed it. That was the last argument we had. The rest of what happened over the next few days didn't look dramatic from the outside. But it changed everything. That afternoon, I drove to the Chase branch on Wilson Bridge Road. The young woman behind the desk had a neat little name tag that said, Allison. "What can I help you with today?" she asked. "I'd like to open a checking account," I said. "In just your name?" "Yes." She smiled politely and started typing. 10 minutes later, I had a new account number and a small packet explaining online banking. On the way home, I stopped at Staples. Bought a pack of folders. Blue, green, yellow. Nothing fancy. That evening, Ron sat in the living room watching a baseball game while I worked at the kitchen table. I didn't announce anything. I just started sorting. Tax returns. Mortgage paperwork. Bank statements. Retirement accounts. For years, we'd kept everything in a messy file drawer in the office. I'd always been the one who knew where things were. Now I was organizing them. Not for him. For me. Around 9, he wandered into the kitchen. "What are you doing?" "Getting paperwork straight," I said. He nodded like that made sense. Good idea. He went back to the television. Over the next 2 days, I made small changes. Quiet ones. The kind you only notice when they're gone. First, I redirected my paycheck. I work part-time at a dental office in Worthington doing billing. My check had always gone into our joint account. Not anymore. Then I logged into the Total Wine account and canceled the automatic delivery we'd set up for holidays. Next, I removed my email from the shared calendar I'd created years ago. That calendar had everything in it. Ron's cardiology appointments, his mother's prescription reminders, Kelsey's birthday, insurance renewal dates, gone. Thursday morning, I drove to CVS and picked up my own prescription refill. The pharmacist asked if I wanted to grab Ron's too. "He's due." I smiled. "He can come by later." Back at home, I set the folders on the dining room table. Utilities, insurance, medical. His mother's care facility information. Each one labeled neatly. I didn't leave a note. By afternoon, the phone started ringing. Ron. I watched it buzz on the kitchen counter. Let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it rang again. I answered that one. "Yeah." "Where's the login for the water bill?" "In the utilities folder." Pause. "What utilities folder?" "Dining room table." Another pause. "Oh." He hung up. An hour later, the phone rang again. "Do you know the number for Mom's oxygen supplier?" "It's in the medical folder." "Why'd you move everything?" "I didn't move it," I said. "I organized it." That night, I met Marlene for dinner at Bob Evans. She ordered the pot roast. I had the chicken salad. Halfway through the meal, I told her what had happened. The photo. The comment. The way Ron had brushed it off. Marlene set her fork down. "That man has been leaning on you for years," she said. "I know. You planning to burn the place down?" I laughed. "Number." "Good," she said. "Because that kind of revenge usually blows back on you." She took a sip of iced tea. "You want my advice?" "Sure." "Don't ruin your life trying to hurt him," she said. "Just stop carrying his." That stuck with me. By Saturday, Ron was starting to feel the changes. He called from the garage that morning. "Janice." "What?" "Where's my blood pressure refill card?" "I don't know." "You always know." "Not this time." A few minutes later, my phone buzzed again. I looked at the screen. His name. I let it ring. For the first time in years, I didn't fix the problem. By Sunday afternoon, the house felt different. Not louder, not quieter exactly. Just less managed. That's the best way I can describe it. For years, I'd been the invisible layer of organization underneath everything. The reminders, the lists, the little nudges that kept life moving smoothly. When that layer disappeared, things started bumping into each other. Ron noticed first with the small stuff. Tuesday morning, he couldn't find the login for the electric bill, even though it was right where I'd said in the folder labeled Utilities. Wednesday, he missed a call from his cardiologist's office about an appointment because the reminder used to come through my email. Thursday, he called me at work. Did you move the car insurance card? Number. Well, it's not in the glove compartment. It's in the insurance folder. Silence. You made folders for everything. Yes. Another pause. I liked it better when you just handled it. I didn't respond. Because that sentence had been the whole problem. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table again, this time with my laptop open. There were still a few loose ends I needed to understand. When you've been married a few years, finances and responsibilities start weaving together in ways that are hard to see until you slow down and look. I logged into the household desktop computer in the office. The same old Dell we'd had since before we got married. Ron wasn't great with computers. Half the time, he forgot to log out of things. I was forwarding myself copies of documents, insurance statements, mortgage info, when I noticed an email thread open in the corner of the screen. The subject line caught my eye. Birthday dinner plan? At first, I almost ignored it. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. I clicked. The first message was from Linda. Hey everyone, just a quick plan for Saturday. Let's do family photo early before people wander off. Under that was a reply from Denise. Sounds good. Kelsey would like one with just immediate family too. Immediate family. The phrase sat there in black letters. Then Ron's response appeared underneath. Yeah, that works. I'll handle it. My stomach tightened. I scrolled down. Linda had written back. Let's just keep it simple. No need to make things awkward. Denise responded with a thumbs up emoji. And then Ron again. Janice gets sensitive about this stuff. I'll handle her. I leaned back in the chair. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. For a long moment, I just stared at the screen. It wasn't the worst thing I'd ever read, but it explained everything. The photo hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment comment. They had talked about it, decided it, planned the moment I stepped out. The strange thing was, I didn't feel the sharp sting I expected. Instead, I felt something heavier, like a weight dropping into place. All those little moments over the years suddenly rearranged themselves. Linda's comments, the old stories about Denise, the way Ron always brushed things aside. They hadn't thought of it as cruelty, just convenience. I pushed back from the desk and walked into the laundry room. A basket of clean clothes sat on the dryer. Ron's socks on top. I picked one up without thinking, then sat down on the small folding chair in the corner. And finally, for the first time since the birthday dinner, I cried. Not loud. Just quiet tears sliding down my face while I stared at that stupid gray sock in my hand. Part of me still loved the man I'd married. The guy who'd danced with me at that VFW hall 5 years earlier. The one who'd brought me coffee in bed the first winter we were together. But another part of me was waking up. After a few minutes, I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and stood up. Right then, my phone rang. I glanced at the screen. Mrs. Whitaker, Assisted Living. That was Ron's mother's facility. I answered. Hello. Janice, honey, came the familiar voice of Carol at the front desk. Sorry to bother you on a Sunday. That's okay. What's going on? Well, we're trying to process the add-on care payment for your mother-in-law this month, and the card declined. I frowned. That's strange. Ron said you usually handle it. Of course he did. Let me look into it, I said. Thank you, dear. When the call ended, I leaned against the counter. Even now, even after the birthday dinner, even after the email, they all still expected me to keep things running, because that was my role. The quiet fixer. The woman behind the curtain making life smoother. Except now, I knew exactly how they talked about me when I wasn't in the room. I'll handle her. I walked back to the office, opened a new document on the computer, and began writing a list. Not an angry one. A factual one. Everything I managed. Everything I paid for. Everything I arranged. By the time I finished, it was 3 pages long. Later that evening, Ron walked into the kitchen while I was making tea. Mom's place called, he said. Something about a payment. I know, I said. You take care of it. Number. He looked confused. What do you mean, no? I mean, you can call them tomorrow. He blinked. That's usually your thing. Not anymore. For the first time since the birthday dinner, he actually studied my face. Something in my expression must have been different, because he didn't argue. He just nodded slowly and walked back into the living room. That night, I slept better than I had in days. Not because everything was solved, but because I finally understood something clearly. The moment Ron wrote, "I'll handle her," he had already made a decision about where I stood. Now it was my turn to decide what to do about it. Monday morning started like any other weekday. Alarm at 6:30. Coffee maker humming. The soft sound of the neighborhood waking up, car doors, a dog barking 2 houses down, someone rolling a trash bin to the curb. Except this time, I wasn't moving through the morning the way I usually did. Normally by 7, I'd have already checked Ron's calendar, glanced at the weather, and reminded him whether he needed a jacket or not. That morning, I made coffee for one. Ron came into the kitchen, rubbing his eyes. "You already leave the house calendar this morning?" he asked. "Number." He looked confused. "It's empty." "Yes," I said. He stood there a moment, like a man looking at a chair that had always been in the room, but suddenly wasn't. "All right," he muttered. He poured coffee and went to the living room. I left for work 10 minutes later. At the dental office, the morning moved fast. Insurance claims, billing calls, the usual routine. Normally, that kind of work keeps my brain busy enough to forget everything else. But that day, my mind kept circling back to the same thing. Sunday. Ron's mother's house. Linda had planned a family cookout that afternoon. A small one, just close relatives. Normally, I would have helped organize it, brought a side dish, made sure people remembered what time to arrive. This time, I hadn't lifted a finger. Around noon, my phone buzzed. "Ron." I let it go to voicemail. Then a text came through. "Are you coming today?" I stared at the message for a while. Part of me wanted to stay home. Avoid the whole thing. Because confrontation at 58 feels different than it did at 25. You're more aware of how tired you'll be afterward. But another thought kept pressing forward. He made the insult public. The correction should be public too. When my shift ended at 3, I drove home. The house was quiet. Ron had already left for his mother's place in Westerville. On the kitchen counter sat the envelope I'd prepared the night before. Inside were 3 copies of the same document. One for Ron, one for Linda, one for Kelsey. Not angry letters, just facts. 3 pages listing everything I handled in our shared life. Bills, appointments, insurance renewals, medical coordination for his mother, holiday hosting costs. The total surprised even me when I added it up. Not just money, time, energy, responsibility. All the invisible pieces that make a household run. I slipped the envelope into my purse. For a few minutes, I stood in the kitchen debating with myself. What if Kelsey thought I was attacking her father? What if I looked petty? What if this whole thing just made me the bitter stepmother in everyone's story? I almost set the purse back down. Almost stayed home. Instead, I grabbed my keys. The drive to Westerville took about 20 minutes. Traffic on I-270 crawled in a few spots, giving me too much time to think. At one red light, I nearly turned around. Then I remembered the email on the computer screen. "I'll handle her." That sentence had already decided how this family saw me. The least I could do was correct the record. When I pulled into Carol's driveway, several cars were already parked along the curb. Linda's SUV, Gary's pickup, Kelsey's silver Honda. I took a deep breath before getting out of the car. The backyard gate was open. Voices floated through the warm afternoon air. Someone laughing. The sizzle of burgers on a grill. It smelled like charcoal and barbecue sauce. I stepped into the yard. Linda stood near the picnic table pouring lemonade. "Janice," she said a little too brightly. "There you are." Gary waved from the grill. Kelsey gave me a quick smile. And then I saw Denise. She was standing in the kitchen doorway holding a tray of deviled eggs. My deviled egg tray. The white ceramic one with the little blue flowers around the edge. Ron must have grabbed it from our kitchen when he left earlier. For a second, I almost laughed. Even my recipes had somehow become community property. Ron walked over from the grill when he spotted me. His expression relaxed, like he'd just solved a problem. "There she is," he said. He leaned down and kissed my cheek like nothing had happened. "Knew you'd cool off?" I smiled politely. Not warmly. Just enough to keep the moment from exploding too early. "Hi, Ron." He handed me a paper plate. "Grab something to eat?" I nodded and moved toward the table. Inside my purse, the envelope felt heavier than it should have. People chatted about ordinary things. The Browns' chances this season? Gas prices. Someone's upcoming knee surgery. It struck me how normal everything sounded. Like the moment at the birthday dinner had simply been erased from the room. But it hadn't been erased from me? I waited. Let everyone fill their plates. Let conversations settle into that comfortable after-meal rhythm where nobody expects anything dramatic. Then I stood up. "Before we get too far into the afternoon," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it carried. Forks paused in midair. Ron looked up from his chair. "What's going on?" I took the envelope out of my purse. "Just something I need to clear up." The backyard grew quiet. For the first time all afternoon, every pair of eyes in that yard was on me. I stood there with the envelope in my hand and realized something almost funny. 5 years earlier, I would have been shaking. The old version of me would have apologized before even speaking, softened things, made sure nobody felt uncomfortable. That version of me was very tired. So I kept my voice steady. "Before anyone takes another picture today," I said I'd like to clear something up. Nobody laughed this time. Ron shifted in his chair. "Janice, what are you doing?" "Just explaining something," I said. I placed 3 envelopes on the picnic table. One in front of Ron, one in front of Linda, one in front of Kelsey. Inside each was the same 3 pages I'd printed. A list. Ron frowned. "What is this?" "It's a record," I said, "of everything I manage in our household." Linda blinked. "Janice." I raised my hand slightly. "Just let me finish." The backyard had gone very still. Even Gary had turned away from the grill. "I realized something after Ron's birthday dinner," I said calmly. "Apparently my role in this family has been unclear." Ron groaned. "Not this again." I ignored him. "Last weekend, Ron asked me to step out of a picture because it was for family." That moment didn't come out of nowhere. Linda's eyes dropped to the envelope. Kelsey looked confused. "What do you mean?" I glanced at Ron. "You can explain the email thread if you'd like." Ron's face changed slightly. Not panic exactly, but the look of a man who just realized the conversation wasn't going the direction he expected. "What email?" Kelsey asked. I answered. "The one discussing the birthday dinner photos. The one where your dad wrote that he'd handle me." Silence spread across the yard. Linda slowly opened the envelope. Kelsey did the same. Ron didn't move. His jaw tightened. "Janice, this isn't the place." "This is exactly the place," I said quietly. I pointed at the papers. "That list shows everything I currently handle in Ron's life and in parts of this family." Linda skimmed the page. Her eyebrows rose. "Medical appointments," she murmured. "Yes." "Insurance renewals." "Yes." Gary leaned over her shoulder. "Wait, you coordinate Mom's oxygen deliveries." I did. Kelsey turned another page. "You track my car payment reminders." I nodded. Ron finally picked up the papers. "You're being ridiculous." "No," I said calmly. "I'm being clear." A breeze moved through the yard. Someone's paper napkin fluttered off the table. "For years, I've quietly managed the logistics that keep things running." I continued. "Bills, schedules, medical coordination, holidays." I paused. Apparently that work didn't qualify me for belonging. Denise stood very still near the doorway. I hadn't said her name once. That seemed to bother Ron more than anything else. "Janice, you're blowing this out of proportion." I looked at him. "No, I'm correcting it." Kelsey looked between us. "Dad, did you really write that?" Ron shifted uncomfortably. "It wasn't meant the way it sounds." Linda spoke softly. "You said you'd handle her." Ron rubbed his forehead. It was just easier. Easier. That word floated in the air like smoke. I nodded. Yes, that's exactly the point. I tapped the pages. So here's the part that matters. Everyone looked back down. Effective immediately, I said, I'm no longer responsible for the things listed there. Ron scoffed. Oh, come on! I'm serious. I went down the list calmly. No more managing your mother's medical coordination. Carol, Ron's mom, looked surprised from her lawn chair. Oh, no more organizing holidays. Linda blinked. No more covering family expenses that come from my account. Gary whistled under his breath. And no more fixing problems that belong to you. Ron's face turned red. You're making me look bad. That was when someone at the far end of the table, one of Gary's cousins, let out a small, accidental laugh. It wasn't mean, just startled. Because Ron had just flipped to the page listing all the login information he'd never learned. He muttered under his breath. Where's the prescription portal password? The cousin laughed again before catching himself. The sound cracked something open in the room. For the first time, people were seeing the situation clearly. Ron wasn't the organized host holding the family together. He'd just been the man standing in front of the person doing the work. Ron slammed the papers on the table. You're being dramatic. No, I said evenly. I just stopped covering it. Kelsey looked down at the pages again. Dad, she really does handle all this. Linda nodded slowly. I didn't realize. Ron looked around the yard. For the first time all afternoon, he seemed unsure where to land. Then he tried a different tactic. So what, you're leaving? I met his eyes. Yes. A long pause followed. I've rented a furnished apartment in Dublin, I said. Short term for now. Ron stared at me. You're serious? Yes. The movers come Monday, I added. Just for the things I brought into the marriage. No one spoke. Even the grill had gone quiet. Finally, Carol cleared her throat. Well, she said softly, I suppose we'll all have to learn a few things. Ron looked around again. But no one jumped to rescue him. Because there wasn't anything left to argue about. The facts were sitting right there on 3 pieces of paper. I picked up my purse. That's all I wanted to say. Ron stood halfway out of his chair. Janice. But I didn't stop. I walked through the gate and out to the street. The late afternoon sun had started dropping behind the trees. My car was still where I'd parked it. I sat inside for a moment before starting the engine. Not crying, just breathing. The drive back felt strangely quiet. Not empty. Just lighter. The next few weeks were complicated. Ron called several times. Sometimes angry. Sometimes apologetic. Sometimes confused about things like the insurance renewal or his mother's prescription portal. Kelsey texted me about 10 days later. I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. We met for coffee at a Panera in Worthington. The conversation was careful but honest. Life doesn't magically tie itself up after moments like that. But it does move forward. My apartment in Dublin turned out to be small but comfortable. 1 bedroom. Neutral carpet. A little balcony that overlooked a row of maple trees. The first thing I bought was a yellow floor lamp from Target. Then a decent reading chair. For the first time in years, the refrigerator held only the groceries I liked. Some nights were quiet, lonely even, but it was the kind of quiet that lets you hear yourself think again. And that's worth more than people realize. If you've ever been slowly pushed to the side in your own life, you probably understand that feeling. Sometimes reclaiming your dignity doesn't require shouting. Just the courage to stop carrying what was never yours alone. Thanks for listening. And if this story meant something to you, feel free to share it with someone who might need to hear it too.